Good morning, everyone. I'm Meredith. I'm the lead pastor here at the Well, and we are continuing our series, What the Health? And last week we talked about lust. If you didn't get to see that, we were virtual last week. Go and check it out. It will make you both uncomfortable and hopeful, I hope. And today we are talking about gluttony. And our culture loves food and has all sorts of interesting messages about food. And some of them are like this. So the first one here. Abs are temporary, but chocolate is forever. Some of you are like, that is my life motto. I live by that. Who needs a six-pack when I can have 6 bars of chocolate, right? Next one, fries before guys. So some of you are like, yeah, fries are my ride or die. Next one, fun size is for quitters. Who needs a little one if you can have a giant king-size candy bar? And I've forgotten a lot of things in life. A meal has never been one of them. So, some of you have never forgotten a meal before. And the last one here is, I just want someone to look at me the way that I look at food, right? And some of you love food. And food, it's this interesting thing that we have this relationship with it. And we know how much it matters. We know more about it when something is taken away. Either because you've chosen to take something away, or maybe you've had an allergy or a disease or something like that. I know for me, the first time I decided to cut sugar out of my diet, I thought, it's not going to be that big of a deal. We don't eat that much sugar. And so I knew that there might be a problem when my husband Steve started giving me a very wide berth, and like walking on eggshells. I'm like, what? I'm not that edgy. And then I realized there was a problem when I was reading a book and didn't like something it said, so I chucked it across the room, and I thought, this is not good. I am not doing well. And I realized that I had much more of a grip on my life than I realized because, I was having withdrawal symptoms. And often we have to wonder, what should our relationship with food be? What should our perspective around food be? How much should it matter? And some familiar words from Jesus, I think, can help us navigate this issue. And so this is what Jesus says in Luke chapter 12. He says, then turning to his disciples, Jesus said, that is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to eat or enough clothes to wear, for life is more than food, and your body more than clothing. Look at the ravens. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for God feeds them. And you are far more valuable to him than any birds. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And if worry can't accomplish a little thing like that, what's the use of worrying over bigger things? Look at the lilies and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was not just as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for flowers that are here today and thrown in the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? And don't be concerned about what to eat and what to drink. Don't worry about such things. These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers all over the world. But your Father already knows your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give everything you need. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. This will store up treasure for you in heaven, and the purses of heaven never get old or develop holes. Your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it. No moth can destroy it. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. And so we see Jesus with this crowd asking this really fundamental question. Why are you so worried about food? Why are you chasing after it? Why are you trying to store it up? Why is it such a concern for you? And again, we have to wonder, is it because we've taken something that's insignificant and made it significant? Should we just see food food is like, it's just nourishment, it's not important, and we've made it important. And we can tell that in our country we have a bit of a complicated relationship with food. Over a quarter of adults are considered overweight, and about 17% of youth, but then there's also an estimated 8 million people who are suffering from an eating disorder of some sort. And so our relationship with food is complicated. We don't quite know what we should do with it. Should it matter? Should it not matter? But when we look at the story of God, we begin to realize it does matter. Food does matter. Food is almost like a character in the Bible. It shows up all of these different places. For example, the very beginning of our story starts in a garden, right? This garden that God has made all this food, and he tells them what to eat and what not to eat, right? And food is meant to be part of nourishment and restoration. It's right there from the beginning. It doesn't come after the fall. It's not a fault in the plan, right? It's part of the design. We are meant to be emptied and filled. Food is meant to point us to God, who is our creator and our sustainer and our provider. That's meant to be what food is. And we see that God uses food throughout the entire story of Israel, where he gives them feasts and festivals and food codes to shape them as a people. And even the most fundamental moment in Israel's history, the Passover, right? And they're about to leave Egypt. And what does he do? The night before, God gives them a special meal and tells them how to eat. And then he tells them to do this every single year. Why? Because as you are having this meal, your children will ask you, why are we doing this? Why do we eat like this? And then you will tell them the story that God delivered you from Egypt. So God has used food to shape us, to help us express ourselves. And food, if you've ever met someone who's of a different culture, food is a great way to connect with someone. It's a great way to express ourselves. I mean, we have a whole network devoted to food, right? Some of you are like, that's all I watch is Food Network, because I want to see all the creative things that people can do. And I know for me personally, I had a friend when I went to seminary, and she was originally from Korea, and she had immigrated here when she was a teenager. And when she came here, it was not popular to be Korean or to use your Korean name. So she changed her name to this very plain English name and kind of tried to hide the fact that she was originally from Korea. But as she went through grad school and we had this group together, she began to reclaim who she was. And she had us over one day to her home, and she made this feast of authentic Korean food. And she started to go by her original Korean name. And we knew her more through that. It was an opportunity to connect. So food is a gift. It's a gift from God. It is meant to help us connect, to express ourselves. We can be creative with it, and it points us to God. But that relationship can get out of whack, and it can get disordered. In the Christian tradition, the word for that is gluttony. And gluttony is more than overindulgence and overeating or being overweight. That's not what gluttony is. Because just like last week we talked about how lust is not just a physical thing, it's a matter of the heart. So it is with gluttony. Gluttony is not a matter of the stomach, it's a matter of the heart. It's when we no longer turn to our Creator to provide and sustain and fill us up, we start to try to fill ourselves. And there's a saying that you've probably heard, you are what you eat, right? And that's a great saying because it reminds us that what you put in your body is not neutral, right? If you eat junk food, it's going to do something to your body. But gluttony kind of gives us a different spin on that. It's not just you are what you eat, it's you are how you eat. You are how you eat. How you eat will give you a sign of what's going on inside of your heart. Frederick Buechner says this. He says, a glutton is one who raised the icebox for a cure for spiritual malnutrition. And so, looking at our relationship with food and how we interact with food helps us get a sense of what's going on in our heart. And I know this is a tricky topic, and some of you are like itching or squirming because there's a lot of shame messages around food, and our culture gives all sorts of mixed messages, like you're supposed to be able to eat whatever you want and be as thin as you possibly can be. And both of those things should be true, and we know that that's not really how it works, but all of us think that is how it should work. Something's wrong with me, that I can't just eat donuts and hamburgers and be the skinniest person around. Like, what's defective there? And so our culture has mixed up messages, and so we start to get this disordered relationship with food, where we take something that's meant to point us towards God, and it can actually start to block us from God. And again, gluttony is more than overeating, or being overweight. That's what often we think, but actually the Christian tradition says there's 5 forms of gluttony. So good for you, you probably have one of them, at least one. The 5 forms: too daintily, too sumptuously, too hastily, too greedily, too much. Those are the 5 forms, and we're going to break down each one of them. And the first one is too daintily. And the best thing to represent this form of gluttony is a Starbucks cup. Because too daintily is the gluttony of just so. It's the gluttony of particularity. It's, I just need it my way. And a Starbucks cup literally has 6 boxes for you to tell them exactly what you want. And some of you, I know, they have to write outside of those 6 boxes. You have more things than just this. You are so particular, which is fine. And the gluttony too daintily is not just, it's not that you shouldn't have personal preferences. It's not that you should just take what you're given and like it and don't expect anything. It's when that becomes a habit of the heart. When I cannot be satisfied unless it is my way. It is the gluttony of just so. So Steve and I, we lived in Seattle for 4 years, and he worked at one of the fanciest coffee shops in the city. And people can be really, I mean, you think Starbucks is bad, people can be really snobby in snobby coffee shops. And there was one customer in particular that when she walked in, all of the baristas were like, because she was the worst. She was literally the worst because she needed her coffee to a particular degree. So she would get a coffee and she'd come up and say, this is too hot. And then they'd make it again too hot. This is too cold. And it came down to there was only one person who could make her coffee right. And we think this is absurd. But we can all kind of fall into this. And C.S. Lewis talks about it like this. He says, it's the all I want state of mind. All she wants is a cup of tea properly made, or an egg properly boiled, or a slice of bread properly toasted, but she never finds any servant or any friend who can do these simple things properly, because her properly conceals an insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible. And here's the thing, when we fall into the gluttony of too daintily, the heart issue behind that is really control. It's control, because think about it, there's so much in this world that you cannot control, right? You can't control if school is ever going to come back in, or if all of your buildings are going to flood the week before. You can't control if you're going to get promoted. You can't control when you're going to die. You can't control if your kids are going to graduate. You can't control so many things, and that can feel very overwhelming and scary. And so what do you start to do? I can control this thing. I can get my way precisely. And some of the ways that too daintily shows up, this form of gluttony, it can show up in picky eating, extreme portion control, yo-yo or fat dieting, counting calories, and in extreme cases, eating disorders. Because the reality is eating disorders are not about food, eating disorders are about control. And so when we feel out of control, this thing that's meant to point us towards God starts to block us from God, and we miss this greater kingdom invitation that Jesus extends to us, this greater kingdom truth that tells us that that's not what we need to do. Because Jesus says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? See, when we start to control our world through food, we forget and we miss that you don't need to be in control. Someone else is in control. And there's a bigger story being written, and we know the ending, and it's going someplace good. And so instead of trying to take something and make ourselves feel more comfortable and in control, we miss that invitation of pointing us towards God, that God is our provider and our sustainer. And so I don't need to control every little thing in my life. The second form of gluttony is too sumptuously. And the best image I have for too sumptuously is cookies. And so Imogen, my daughter Imogen, she's now 10, but when she was 2, she had her first cookie. And Steve has a saying, he says, don't ever give a toddler a good thing, because it's just going to be a disaster. And that is basically what happened. So she got her first cookie, and then the next morning she woke up and she said, cookies? Got cookies for breakfast? I'm like, no, we don't eat cookies for breakfast. And then lunch, can we eat cookies? Are we going to have cookies for lunch? No, we're not having cookies for lunch. Dinner, same thing you can imagine, all day long, right? And it didn't go very well. It ended in tantrums. And it was really, really hard to teach Imogen that cookies are not an everyday food. Cookies are sometimes food, right? That the idea of this is a treat. But when we fall into the gluttony of too sumptuously, we take sometimes foods and sometimes things, and we need to have them every day. That life doesn't feel worthwhile without a treat of some sort. I need to treat myself. I need to reward myself. I made it through the day. I made it to work. I drove in, and my day, if I don't have my blueberry muffin and my Starbucks coffee with all 7 boxes, and they have to add one for me, my day is just not complete. Like, it's just not even worth living this day. And so, too sumptuously is this idea of I need these things in order to function. It becomes the gluttony of extravagance. And so the reality is, the fear behind that is this fear of meaninglessness and worthlessness. That the ordinary isn't valuable. The ordinary isn't enough. I need it to be special. I need it to be bigger. I need it to be something more. And ultimately, I need to impress others. I need to show others how meaningful my life is and how worthwhile my life is. So I knew someone many, many years back, and he was a wine connoisseur. But no matter what party he went to, wherever he went, he brought his own fancy wine glasses and his own special wine, right? It's not like he brought it to share with everyone else. It was his, and part of it was, oh, heaven forbid, if you had to have a subpar glass of wine at a party, I mean, you might just die, right? But on top of that, it wasn't just, I need this to be happy, but I also need you to see something about me, right? I'm the type of person who has fancy wine glasses and brings my own fancy bottle of wine to parties because I'm so valuable. And that's the problem with the gluttony of too sumptuously, is we start to think, I need to prove my value. I need to prove that I'm meaningful. I need to prove my worth. And so we start to get into these particular patterns and rituals with food. And it might look like this, that you always need dessert. Every day. Life is not worth it without dessert. And I love dessert. Don't get me wrong. I love dessert. Or needing a treat to get through the day. Always having to order the most expensive meal on the menu. Needing rich and extravagant and hard to find ingredients. Or else it's just not worth it. It's not worth making a meal. But again, when we fall into the gluttony of too sumptuously, that I'm trying to fill up my own life and make it feel worthwhile and make it feel meaningful, we miss the kingdom invitation that Jesus has for us. And the deeper truth, he says, how much more valuable are you than birds? Right? Like, look at the birds. You are way more valuable than birds. You don't have to earn or prove your value. It's already there. It's a given because you're made in the image of God. You are loved and valued just because you are. And we miss that when we start to try to make ourselves feel valuable with something that in the end doesn't actually ever leave us feeling valued. The third form of gluttony is too hastily. And I think the best thing to describe too hastily represent that is McDonald's, right? And let's all be honest, you get your McDonald's, right? And when you get your French fries, you take each bite slowly, right? You savor every single French fry, and you just make sure that you're into. No, you don't, right? You eat it so fast. You're like, I didn't even know that I finished that. There's a reason why they call it fast food. It's not just how fast we get it. It's how fast we eat it. Because if we slow down, we might be like, what am I eating? Like, this stuff doesn't biodegrade, right? Like, it doesn't even break down. And so when we fall into too hastily, it means that we're rushing. It's hurry. It's the gluttony of hurry. And you start to see this when you're eating on the go. You're eating in your car. You're eating at your desk. You're eating at a vending machine. You're microwaving your meal. Like, you're eating standing up because you don't have time. Like, we all have to go. We're all going to eat. We're going to run it. And you're going to go here. I'm going to go here. It's hurry. And the fear behind hurry is no one else is going to provide it for me. Like, if I stop, no one else is giving it to me. So I have to keep going. But we start trying to satisfy ourselves with something that's unsatisfying. And in the end, we miss all the gifts that God has for us. Our original fast food story comes in the Hebrew Bible with Jacob and Esau. And Esau's been out in the field and he comes in and Jacob has made a stew and Esau is famished, so hungry. And he looks at it and he literally says, give me some of that red stuff or I will die. He's not even like some of that amazing stew that you've been working, it's red stuff. Just give me that red stuff. And Jacob is very crafty. He says, I'll give it to you, but you have to sell me your birthright. And Esau goes, fine. He's in such a rush. He sells away his gift from God for a bowl of red stuff. And the truth is, many of us do the exact same thing. When we are in this perpetual cycle of hurry, I can't stop, we fall into the trap of busyness. And Henry Nouwen talks about busyness like this. You are always filled, every moment is filled, and you are left unfulfilled. Your life feels fragmented, you're pulled in many directions, it doesn't feel cohesive, and in the end, you're busy and bored. And it's not bored that you don't have anything to do, it's bored that you wonder, what's the purpose of all of this? What's the meaning of all of this? But we're going at such a pace that we don't even stop to reflect. We don't reflect on what we're eating, how we're eating, and we don't reflect on how we're living. But again, Jesus has a bigger invitation for us. And he says this, look, they don't sow or reap. Birds don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. Jesus says, pay attention to your surroundings. Birds don't walk around rushing because they know that God will provide for them. But when you rush and hurry, you miss out on the fact that you don't have to provide for yourself. He says, God already knows what you need. It might not be what you want, but God knows what you need. And we miss out on that invitation. The next form of gluttony is chew greedily. And the thing that represents chew greedily the best is chips and salsa. Now, there's something that happens if you notice. You go to a Mexican restaurant, they put the chips in front of you, and it suddenly is like a competition as to who can eat the most chips right now, because what if they run out, right? They're going to refill it. Have you ever gone and they've not refilled your bag? Sorry, bad day. All the tortilla chips are gone. And you're like, I didn't get mine. I didn't get my fill. But you just start to rush and inhale as many chips as possible and wait for the refill, but worry that the refill might not come. And so, too greedily is this, I have to get mine. I have to get mine. I don't really care about yours. I need mine. And so this idea of, there's not enough. There's not enough to go around. And so it's this scarcity mindset of, if you get it, then I don't get it. If you win, I lose. And so we start to hoard. And we've seen we just went through a storm, right? And how many of you went to the grocery store and like, who needs 25 jugs of milk? But you saw people. I've literally seen people go through the chicken aisle and just start taking all the things into their basket. You're like, you're not gonna eat that much. It's 4 days. You're gonna be okay. But people start to panic. Right? They start to think, well, there's not going to be enough. All the food in Oklahoma is going to run out over 4 days, and I'm going to be left with nothing, because there's nothing in my pantry. But there's plenty in your pantry, right? There is plenty in your pantry. I've been to many houses where you're like, you can't even fit things. You have 2 freezers, and you bought more freezer stuff, and you can't fit things in the freezers you already have. And people think, I need to have this, because if all the food in Oklahoma goes away, I have 2 freezers plus some food. I'm fine, right? I'll be good for a week or so. Right? This is too greedily. And it starts to show up you're in a long line and you look behind you and you think, there's no way I'm getting seconds, so I'm going to take mine now, right? And you don't think maybe me taking my seconds right now doesn't mean that person doesn't get there first. Or you think, I need the biggest piece or the best piece, right? It shows up culturally. We are a nation that wastes over 40% of our food annually. And that's billions of dollars. And there are many countries that are living on subsistence living, right? But culturally, there's not enough to go around, right? This is when we go to Costco, we don't buy 1, we buy 2, because we think, well, they might not have it again, right? And I've been guilty of that. I've totally been guilty of that. And so we can start to think, this is mine, right? And it shows up in hoarding food, taking extra, taking the best, because you think, I deserve mine. I have to get mine. But again, we miss out on this kingdom truth, because the whole fear behind that is security, right? I have to make myself secure. I feel insecure. I feel like the world isn't trustworthy, and so I have to make sure that I'm okay, that I'm set up. But again, Jesus says this, and do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. And then our last form of gluttony, which is, I think, the hardest one to talk about. And it is too much. And the one that I think represents this is Jell-O, right? Because there's always room for Jell-O. And so too much is overeating, it is overindulgence, but it's really the gluttony of distraction is what it is. Because it's not just about that you like food and you eat too much food. This is not about eating too much at Thanksgiving or having an extra piece of pie. This is about this fear of there is something that if I actually give it space, it will consume me. And so it's this distraction, because many of us, when we fall into the gluttony of too much, we don't even realize that we're doing it. We don't even realize that that's the case. And it shows up like this. It's eating when we're not hungry. It's snacking absentmindedly. It's ordering our day around food. It's consistently overeating. And I want to share with you, this is a form of gluttony that I have struggled with. So for most of my life, I was overweight, like significantly overweight. And I didn't even know, it's a gluttony distraction. I didn't even realize it, that I was eating as a buffer. And that's often what it is. It's this buffer. Then I don't realize that there's all this stuff going on. And then one day, I realized that I had been ordering my day around food, and I just come to know Jesus recently, and I thought, wow, this feels like it matters too much. Like I'm fixated on food, and I had never even thought about how much I thought about it. And so I just prayed, God, I don't even know what this is, but I pray that you would make it not matter so much. And God started to answer that prayer. And it wasn't overnight, but gradually, food started to lose its grip over me. But what I can tell you is, as food started to lose its grip, suddenly all of these feelings that I didn't even know were there, came in. Feelings of loneliness and hurt and worthlessness and pain. And because I had opened up this space, I didn't realize I was eating. I wasn't just eating my feelings, I was eating to keep my feelings at bay. I didn't know they were there. And that's often the case when we fall into the gluttony of too much. It's not just that you don't have self-control and that you like food too much. It's there's something going on in your life that your fear is, if I stop, if I give it any space at all, it will consume me. It will take over. And there's nothing to get away from it. And again, we miss the promise that Jesus has for us. The kingdom promise. He says to us, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. And the kingdom of God is a place of healing and wholeness and restoration, where death doesn't get the final word, but your wounds don't get the final word. That nothing's wasted in the kingdom of God. And anything that has happened, God can redeem it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't still hurt, but it won't consume you. There's nothing that God cannot heal. There's nothing that God cannot handle in your life. But too often we don't give it any space at all. And so gluttony, I hope you're seeing, is not a matter of the stomach. It is a matter of the heart. And when we stop and we're actually honest about, I am how I eat, how I am approaching food is going to give me a sign of what's going on in my heart, what fear has taken root in my heart. And so when we come to overcoming gluttony, it is not about getting on the right diet, getting the right habits, having more self-control. It's about reorienting our heart. It's about turning back towards God to allow God to heal and to meet those fears and to show us that when Jesus promises those things, they're true, that he's true to his word. Because Jesus says this, he says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And really, it's about treasuring the right things. It's about treasuring the promises of God and the healing and the provision of God and our relationship with God. And not using food to fill ourselves, but reminding ourselves, allowing food to point us back towards God. And so there's two practices in the Christian tradition that are really meant to help reorient our heart towards God. And the very first one is fasting. And the prop for that is here. It's an empty, please don't throw that. It's an empty plate, right? And here's the thing about fasting, is there's a lot of misconceptions about it. Because people think, well, fasting is about being really miserable and unhappy and feeling really bad in front of God. And that is not the point of fasting. God does not ask you to do things to be miserable. That's not the point of fasting. Fasting is literally just making space for God. And so when we take something away, it allows us to begin to make space to pay attention to God. My friend daintily says, when we fast, it's setting the stage for God to show up in our lives. And so fasting is not about choosing something that's going to make you really unhappy. But it is about taking something away that's significant enough that you notice it. And so fasting can be done in terms of fasting a meal. Some people fast a whole meal. Some people fast for a whole day. But not everyone can do that, right? Because sometimes people think, oh, that's just too hard. It might be too hard. It's not necessarily the place to start. Where I have to tell people to start is fast one thing. You pick one thing, whether that's caffeine or bread or chocolate or sugar or fruit or whatever that is, one thing that's significant enough for you to notice it. Because when you reach for it, suddenly you can say, well, what am I reaching for? Am I reaching for something that will fill me and why I think that's going to fill me? Or can I start to reach towards God instead? Does it reorient my heart to say, I don't need to fill my own fear. I need to bring my fear to God. And so fasting, in the season of Lent, this is a great season to try fasting. You just take something away. So it doesn't have to be huge, but something enough to say, I'm going to make some space for God. Because then we're reminded what Jesus says, is not life more than food, right? Your life is more than food. You don't have to store it up and worry and gather it all. It's okay. God will provide for you. And the last practice that the church has always turned to around overcoming gluttony is what we call Eucharist or communion. And some of us have only heard of communion, but Eucharist means thanksgiving. It means thanksgiving. And here's the thing: when Jesus did communion with his disciples the first time, he didn't take extravagant, crazy things that were hard to get, or only the rich could have them, or you only had them occasionally. He took two of the most ordinary elements that everyone would have, bread and wine, and they would have it at almost every meal. And he said, whenever you do this, remember me. Remember what I've done for you. Remember the provision that I have given you. Be grateful for all that God has done. And so when we do communion, it's not about it being routine. And some people have been taught, communion only counts if you feel really, really bad. First you have to think about all the ways you're really, really bad and unworthy, and then you can take communion. That's not it. It's about coming to God with gratitude. It's about coming to God with perspective. Norman Morrisbus says this: whenever we come to the table, whenever people come to the table, they demonstrate with the unmistakable evidence of their stomachs that they are not self-subsisting gods. They are finite and mortal creatures dependent on God's many good gifts: sunlight, photosynthesis, decomposition, soil fertility, water, bees and butterflies, chickens, sheep, cows, gardeners, farmers, cooks, strangers, and friends. Eating reminds us that we participate in a grace-saturated world. And so it's not about just doing the act of communion, which we do here on Sunday mornings to remind ourselves, but it's about taking the everyday, ordinary elements of your day and letting them remind you that you live in a grace-saturated world. And so this can be peanut butter and jelly, goldfish and apple juice. It can be coffee and eggs. It can be cereal and milk. It's taking your ordinary, daily subsistence and letting it point you and reorient you to God, to remind yourselves that you don't need to provide for yourselves, that you don't have to be in control, that you don't have to prove your value or your worth, and that there's nothing too big that God cannot heal, that you don't have to hurry through life, that you can trust that God has you taken care of, and you can rely on Him, and it can reorient your heart. So I want you to think about Eucharist and communion differently this week. Of every meal, stopping and letting the ordinary elements of your day reorient your heart toward God, because we are how we eat. Let's pray. Gracious God, I pray that you would help us to remember who we are and whose we are. Lord, that we would be reminded that you are in control and that you love us and you value us. May we allow the ordinary things of this world to orient our heart towards you, that we would not be afraid, and that we can actually look at how we're using food to try to fill ourselves, and how it might be blocking us from all that you want to invite us into. We're so grateful, Lord, that you've given us ways to reconnect with you and reorient our heart, and that you're not here to fill us with shame, but to set us free. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.